Welcome to the Scale Up Valley podcast, where we bring the best of the best to help you scale a business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is Brett Martin, VC at Charge, co-founder at Kumospace, and also professor at Columbia Business School. Brett, welcome to the show.
Mike, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and what an amazing combination. What a great career of combining kind of the venture capitalist at, a founder at, and even a professor at business school at, which is, it's becoming more common, but it's still an outlier, right? Kind of background. And how are you able to do it simultaneously? I think that's what really is even more outlier. So tell us a bit more about your story, your background, and what you are doing today.
Yeah, I think one of the key learnings I've ever had is that you can do a lot of things as long as each of those things kind of reinforce each other, right? If each thing is going in an opposite direction, you'll never get anywhere. But if each thing actually pushes forward the rest of them, then you can kind of make it work. That's been what I've been trying to do, is get everything rowing in the same direction. But it wasn't always that, and it took a while to figure out what I actually like doing. So I'm from I guess I've really been working in tech, entrepreneurship, startups, venture capital, pretty much my entire career. I'm from a small town called Ocean City, Maryland. I grew up, my dad was an entrepreneur, always had side projects. I sold seashells by the seashore as a 5, 6, 7 year old. I actually my seashell business got ended by regulation. I had started basically getting conch shells, $2 for the bushel, cleaning them up, bleaching them, and selling them for $2 a piece. And I had employed my younger sister, who was maybe 4 or 5 at the time, and was paying her hourly until my parents found out about this and cracked down, and we had even profit sharing, which in retrospect was totally the right decision. You got to treat your family and your people well. So early, good lesson early on. But after that, I went to Dartmouth, and was even then into entrepreneurship. Actually, my roommate from college, this guy, Jordan Cooper, he now runs Pace Capital in New York, started Lair Ventures. But he, was from New York. He had he had more exposure, more worldly. He wasn't from a 7,000 person village. He was from, the Big Apple. And, he was always excited about this thing called, venture capital. And I was like, oh, what's that? That sounds really cool. So we, just a couple of my friends, my buddy Tim Spellman and Melissa Krauts, we entered the Puck business plan competition, and we actually, we won with an idea for in-game video advertising, and this was around 2002, 2001. So that sounded pretty outlandish. Interestingly enough, probably should have stuck with that idea, because about 6, 7 years later, this company called Massive sold for $300 million to Microsoft. So good early lesson on, if you have conviction in something, you should stick with it. We had worse business ideas. We came up with a folding snowboard, which actually eventually there are things now called split boards, but ours folded in the middle, which was not the right design. So maybe better entrepreneurs than engineers, that's for sure. But after that, moved to New York City, kind of blindly, joined an investment bank, doing equity research at Thomas Weisel. I can't say it was very thoughtful, just kind of trying to pay off any debts and be economically self-sufficient. And but I was lucky, it was a very entrepreneurial bank. They were a big internet, Web 1.0. Tommy Weisel was kind of epic figure. He banked all the Web 1.0 companies, and the whole bank had a really entrepreneurial flair. And a bunch of my peers all now run venture capital funds or startups. So that was a great place. But other than those 2 years right out of school, those are the only 2 years I haven't been working in tech, actually. So ever since then, doing startup stuff.
Right. And you start charge your VC firm in 2015, 2020 you start Kumospace, and you start giving classes in 2017. So first VC, right? No, first founder, because you also started companies in 2010, 2013, right? Then you moved to VC, and then after becoming VC, you decide to accumulate with a startup, which is Kumospace. So maybe let's do introductions about what is Charge, the VC firm, all about, and then let's also go to Kumospace for people to get to know more about what you are doing currently.
Yeah, so Charge is a New York-based pre-seed venture-focused venture capital fund. We're on our third fund. We have close to 70 portfolio companies. Really where we specialize. Well, as you mentioned, I teach data analytics and machine learning at Columbia Business School. So we do a lot of AI-focused startups,
Right.
particularly at the intersection of data analytics, AI, and consumer. We also do a lot of PLG focused productivity, SaaS, and future of work. And then the love for entrepreneurship runs deep. So we've been fortunate to back some great creator economy companies and some pretty good crypto ones in that same vein. So that's what we focus on, all kind of purely software, and we invest at the earliest stages of a company's formation. So we write $250 to up to about $1 million checks into companies that are just getting off the ground. Our ideal investment is two brilliant gals in a New York City apartment with a great idea and really hyper relevant founder experience that has led them to some kind of core unique insight, or maybe they have some sort of personal experience or professional experience, and we just like to be the first believers. That's what we focus on at Charge.
Sounds great. And what about Kumospace?
Well, yeah. So Kumospace is an example of that sort of PLG, productivity SaaS that Charge invests in, and I had been very happily just investing out of Charge, like as you mentioned, from 2015 to 2020, and no rush to get back on the sidelines. My first company, Sonar, we started around 2010, and it was great. Great introduction to entrepreneurship. Sort of blew up. Had millions of users in the very early days of the App Store. Had our 15 minutes of fame, but it was a big flash in the pan, a lot of highs and low lows, and I was in no rush to get back into the entrepreneurial arena. That I loved it, but I realized people say ideas don't matter. All that matters is execution. Well, that's not exactly true. Actually, I would much rather start with a really good idea than an average
Great
one,
market.
or the wrong one, right? So I think that's that. Maybe we'll cover that later in your segment, but that's some pretty bad advice, I would say. But with Kumospace, when we see a Charge, one thing I say is that all good ideas look the same. So all good ideas are, have a really large market of underserved users that have a, really unique pain and are looking for a solution and have budget. And, you have high potential, high revenue growth, you have high margins. You have a management team with hyper relevant experience, with lots of professional, skills and complementary skill sets. You've got the network effects and the opportunity for a moat, right? And so, every business looks the same. And so, generally, as an investor, if you see something with all those, then you just put as much money into it as possible, and you wait to collect the check. It's not exactly how it works. There's a lot more to it than that. But
exactly.
But if you that's investing, so it's a lot easier actually to make money as an invest. There's less work involved with being an investor. You just have to make good decisions. And there's a lot of work that goes into making good decisions. But once you've
Yeah.
made it, it's not as much work as an operator. That's when the hard work begins, once you've received the check. So typically I wouldn't, if I see companies with those characteristics, I would just invest. But the difference with Kumospace is well first that the my co-founder and the CEO of Kumospace is Yang Mao, and he's an old friend and a third time business partner for me. Just so really the opportunity to work with Yang again is the first thing, right? I love working with him. He's
Mhm.
all the things I'm not. He's a Princeton engineer that went to Google and then ran consumer facing tech at Oscar Health, and he's deep in the weeds, hands on, you know hyper structured, and
Right.
so get to work with your better half is always a great place to start. But
Yeah.
really, it was, we saw all those characteristics in this business, but the difference is that Kumospace, um, it was, this ability to use technology to help people have more authentic human interactions online. So it was a new, interaction format that was going to enable people to
Mhm.
connect more authentically and genuinely with other people. You're going to be able to have multiple groups of people organically moving between conversations, just like in real life at, say, in an office or at an event. And that form factor didn't exist, and so this opportunity to just help people connect using technology, like if you look at all the startups I've ever been involved in, that's what they do. And so it was the first startup that truly called my name in a decade, and so that's why we got really involved with Charge, essentially got us started, incubated it there, and
Got it.
that's why Kumo Space was different.
Got it. And how would you describe Kumospace, kind of the core business? It's kind of a better Zoom, a different experience, or how would you describe Kumospace for the ones who are not familiar with the company?
It, yeah, I mean, it's tough. You guys see it to believe it, but essentially, Kumo Space is, it's a virtual office. So
Okay.
it's, video chat productivity software where remote distributed hybrid teams kind of, show up to work. So
Okay.
they it's sort of like Slack in the sense that turn on Kumo Space at 9 a.m. You get into it. It's a virtual productivity space where teams, spend 7 hours a day, um, on average. And it helps with three core benefits. It's basically, one is visibility and accountability. So the ability to kind of see your team in Kuma Space. You can see everyone who's in the
Hmm.
office right now. In our office, we probably have 15 people, 20 people in it
Yeah.
working, and so because you can see them, one, it keeps everyone accountable, and people might say, oh well, like how, it's surveillance software. Well, it's actually not just keeping people, team, employees accountable. It keeps the bosses accountable too, right? So the fact
Yeah.
that I'm doing this podcast, my team knows that I'm not in the office right now. So you have to be available for your team. That helps with mentorship, that helps with onboarding new
Hmm.
employees, right? But if you can kind of see your team and your team can see you, then the next thing is that helps with collaboration, right? You can tap someone on the shoulder and virtual shoulder in Kumo Space and get an instant answer to your question. So that makes collaboration much more frequent and informal. So actually, in Kumo Space, we have way less meetings. You look at a lot of teams; they have 5 hours of meetings scheduled before the day starts. Well, when do you actually do anything? That is top of mind or impromptu. So in Kumo Space, the average meeting length is 7 minutes, and
Wow.
that means that you don't spend 5 minutes scheduling or 10 minutes scheduling or finding a time, and then you block out half an hour and then you answer a question that could have been done in 2 minutes, and then you waste the rest of the time. In Kumo Space, you just tap someone on the shoulder, you get an answer that you want, and then you're back to your work in 7 minutes, right? So we have less meetings actually. And then the third part is, because you're having these kind of frequent informal ad hoc interactions, Kumospace actually helps you build, the culture that you want, because, a lot of people think that culture can be solved with like a happy hour or something like that, and it's just not that. Culture is something that evolves organically from multiple touch points and interactions, and Kumospace facilitates that even if you've got a distributed or remote team. So that's Kumospace in a nutshell. And if anyone wants to check it out, definitely hit me up and let me and mention the Scallop Valley podcast, and we'll take good care of you.
Sounds great. And you have raised 10 million plus Series A 1 year ago, right? So it's kind of where you are in terms of stage of growth.
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate. We raised a seed from Bold Start Ventures in New York City, Ed and Elliott, some of my favorite guys, and then we're fortunate to get to work with Paul Murphy. We actually raised a $20 million Series A from Paul Murphy at Lightspeed. Okay. He's a former, he's an entrepreneur himself, and best possible person to have on our team.
Correct. Apologies. 21 million plus. That's what is in the post online. And not sure where I took the 10 million.
Oh, it's all good. Honestly, how much money you raise, it's not that important of a fact.
But yeah, I was surprised because I took notes before I came, and was written in my notebook when I said 10 instead of the 21. Thanks for fixing it. Sounds great. And okay, the two activities are combined, right? So it was through Charge that you were able to get to know Kumospace and to incubate Kumospace and became a co-founder of Kumospace. So I see kind of how it all come together, right? And then how do you add this professor and you start teaching at Columbia? And by the way, that one of the key topics here on the show, it's all about scaling up. And how do you think that what you teach to those MBA students, it's also helpful in terms of helping companies to scale?
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed spending time with young people. They're exciting and have fresh ideas, and so I teach a class with a friend of mine named Daniel Guetta now. I mean, we've been teaching class together for 7 years. And the class we teach is called Analytics in Action. It's basically an applied data science course. So we have run 8 data science projects for anywhere from, Series B and up startups to Fortune, 50 companies like Citigroup or Moody's or L'Oreal. Some of the startups we've had, Electric AI, Bridget, Transfix, but bunch of big Series D, E companies. And so, well, the premise is that the companies bring a problem, they bring a data set, and then we staff them with half MBAs, half engineers, and they basically just get to work. And so we run 8 of those a semester. So I've been fortunate. I've had a lot of data science project management experience, over 50 projects now. And why, how did I get into it? Well, I sort of saw the writing on the wall about data science, data analytics being the future. And I'll be honest, I just sort of said, okay, well, I got to learn more about this. So they say the best way to learn about something is to teach it. And I kind of the professor of Columbia Business School, the dean of Columbia Business School, Greek guy Kostas Magalaris, he basically said, hey, we need more data science curriculum. Why don't you write up why don't you make up a class? So I made up a class, and then I said, okay, well, this is a great opportunity to work hand in hand with an absolute expert in it. And so found some great folks, and eventually got Daniel Guetta, who's the head of the Analytics Institute of Columbia. He used to be a deployed engineer at Palantir, and now I the whole idea was to learn. 7 years later, I've learned a fair amount about machine learning and data analytics, and what it takes to scale systems. So to get to the point of the podcast, one, I'll bring up a concept called premature scaling. So
Yeah.
We've experimented with companies of different shapes and sizes, and what we've really gotten to is like, okay, really they need to be Series B or later to take our class. And why is that? And it's because you know historically with data analytics, maybe this is changing a bit now with these kind of LLMs, but um, you're using past data to predict future performance, or either prediction problem or a classification problem. And the problem is that before you've really built a repeatable business model, you're constantly changing your business
Right.
model. And so what we find is that if you're these seed or Series A funded startups, we can't use their past data to predict future performance because their past data is actually completely incoherent, and their business models changed 5 times, over the past year, and so we never have enough data that is consistent for long enough to actually predict what's going to happen
Right.
next. And so I think a kind of core lesson here is just like premature optimization. Like people are trying to optimize things that
Yeah.
you're actually not in the optimizing business. You're in the
Hmm.
0 to 1 in terms of product market fit
Right.
business, and you'll know it when you hit it, right? As if you're pushing a wet noodle up the hill, and you're constantly churning through different models, you're just not there. You're not at that place to optimize. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing I would say. So once you've got something that you know actually works, and what I mean works is like unit economically kind of viable from tip to tail, from you know acquiring the customer to servicing them
Hmm.
repeatably. um
Right.
Once you've got that, you actually can you can start to optimize kind of different phases, and that's when you'll be really happy that you kept all your that you actually have all your data. You've got all your systems, you've got it all kind of in a place where you can dole it out. So we had a great guy, his name's Guthrie, who longtime Amazon, worked at, built a bunch of systems at Amazon, and he taught the class. He came in, and I think that everyone hears about Amazon is really great with data, right? You hear this
Hmm.
all the time. Amazon amazing at using data for its systems.
Hmm.
Um, and I think at least the conceptions within the class, the MBAs, was that oh well, Amazon must have all of its data perfectly organized. It must be like super structured, and um, and so it turns out actually no, like Amazon's data systems are a mess. The only difference is that they exposed that mess to everyone at the company, right? So
Yeah.
I think people often confuse um, good at data with like overly processed and structured. They think that like to get really good at data and to get good at scaling up, you need to
Hmm.
have everything in like a perfect process and very rigid
Right.
and design. And in reality, part of scaling up quickly is actually being super flexible and constantly being able to change your system quickly to adapt to that next
Yeah.
phase, right? Because when
I
you're scaling
concur.
up quickly,
Yeah.
yeah, when you're scaling up quickly, the problems you're facing are constantly changing, right? The bottleneck is
Yeah.
never in the same place for very long. And so I'll illustrate this with another example that I really like about
Hmm.
scaling up. So one of the really fun parts about being a Columbia Business School professor is that we sometimes students are fortunate enough they choose you as their faculty advisor for their trips. And so what you'll do is you'll take a trip to a different country, and you'll meet a bunch of the great
Hmm.
businesses there, and you get to tour the factories. So I once led the Columbia Business School tour to Japan, which was awesome
Super
because we
nice.
got to see a bunch of great companies, Shiseido, Omron, Toyota. So we got to give this tour of this
Mhm.
Toyota factory, and
Amazing.
we go to this tour in the Toyota factory, and they're showing us the assembly line, and there's partially made cars going down the assembly line, and there's people running around and screwing, rivets on them, and I could sense this kind of palpable disappointment in the students. And we got to the Q&A section of the tour, and they said, the students asked, well, the factory doesn't look that automated. We saw lots of humans, in there, and is Toyota really that advanced in terms of their manufacturing? And the person giving the tour, they said, well, actually, we learned something. Shortly in the 60s, in the very beginning of Toyota, we automated about 90% of all production of car production, and we learned that, and that worked great until we had to build a new car. And
Right.
what they learned is that if you're never changing your processes, sure, you can automate as much of it as away. But the truth is that for any dynamic system, for any scaling system, you're constantly going to be facing new problems and changing things. And so what Toyota learned was that the optimal amount of automation was about 50 to 60%. And it was optimal to always keep about 40, 50% of human labor. Why? Because human labor is actually so much more flexible than any sort of machinery that you're going to build, right? So if you automate these things, the things that aren't going to change, and then you keep really flexible humans, because humans are the most adaptable tool on the planet for places where you think your bottleneck is going to be moving. And so that was, I thought, a really valuable lesson about scaling is, before you automate, ask yourself, is this part of the process going to change? And to the extent you can, is okay, well, in the next step, is the bottleneck going to be somewhere else? And when the bottleneck is there, is that going to change this part of the process? Am I going to automate something else that actually makes this part of the process completely insignificant or no longer important? So that was, I thought, was a really valuable learning from Toyota.
And it makes me think about one of our conclusions when we are scaling is that at certain times when we need to, launch a new car, launch a new process, launch a new product, we need to get back to startup mode again. And sometimes we forget the skills that we need, and that's why we need those builders and scalers, right, in combination, even in a very mature business. So sometimes we think, oh, builders are only for startups, scalers are only for scale-ups, and corporate guys are only for corporates, right? And we need a combination of all those mindsets to be able to be successful in business or to sustain successful. Maybe we are not talking about hypergrowth, but definitely there are some areas in those large conglomerates where you can find hypergrowth, right? So interesting what you've been talking about in terms of scaling
up. 100%. And I think, you're talking about a combination of those skill sets, right? And that's why Amazon has its two pizza team, right?
Yeah.
And, they're trying to build something. And I think, just to bring this back to the data, I think the difference is with Amazon is that in a more calcified, less data forward organization, Amazon is famous for, build everything as if it's going to be used by external third parties, right? Whether that's a service or an API, right? That they build the rule is, their rule is that you have to build this not as if so anyone else in the company can use it. And so what that's enabled is it's given even small teams the ability to access the same infrastructure as anyone else at the company. And so if you had a company that didn't have that sort of open architecture, two-person team would spend months in procurement and getting the right approvals, whereas in Amazon that stuff is freely available. So a 10-person team can do a lot of damage.
Awesome. And something that I know that you are very passionate about, and you even have a talk about it that you gave, which is about the generative AI trends that CEOs should be aware of. So, as we have a lot of founders and CEOs listening to our show, it would be nice to know that now we are going through this Gen AI revolution, and with kind of the thing that we are all aware, the ChatGPT tool being part of our day-to-day nowadays in small things like LinkedIn posting or email copy or website copy or whatever it is that we are thinking, or even for advice, just going there and asking questions to ChatGPT. But a part of that, what else can you share that CEOs should be aware that is really important to to incorporate in their businesses?
I
Very
mean,
open question, I
yeah,
know. Some of the
it's
trends that you see or
well,
highlights.
I
Yeah,
guess I'll just start with, I think it's an amazing time to be, an entrepreneur and an investor, right? Like, anytime there's a new sort of platform shift or, technology
right.
catalyst, right? It's just like Cambrian explosion
That's the timing. Yeah.
of innovation. And it's not always like that. I remember, I'd say like 2015 to 2017, was a boring few years. I remember everyone in tech kind of sitting around being like, well, what's the next thing? People were talking about the heat death of the tech universe, and people were trying to force VR, and it was just so early. And eventually crypto came along and had its kind of first wave. But there are periods where there are doldrums, waiting for the next big thing and forcing
Interesting.
the next big thing. And whereas I think um, now with the generative AI stuff and LLMs, and it's exciting, right? Because you can actually see the difference. You can see the difference in the technology you interact with. You can see all this new potential. And, unlike maybe some of the crypto ideas, which were like highly, very interesting conceptually, but, didn't end up doing that much for the end user, except for, unless you were trading NFTs, for example. You can touch and play and use these tools. And you actually, you're seeing that in the money that these businesses are making, right? Some, people are actually kind of like creating new tools that are actually helping people get stuff done. And that's driving real revenues. You're seeing lots of these companies go from like zero to millions of dollars of revenue in a few months, right? So the opportunity is there. Now, I think, how durable some of those revenues are, how much of it is people just like trying new things. That's TBD. But I think in part it's driven because everyone knows, including the, CEO listeners of your podcast, is like, hey, this technology is out there. It's changing the way people are working. And if I don't adopt it, then I'm going to get left behind. And that goes all the way from, kind of frontline workers, like, you're designer, you're creating 3D assets to, for a game to, I had dinner with a private equity buddy of mine a couple of nights ago, and, he's sitting there sweating bullets, trying to figure out how to incorporate, generative AI into his workflow, just like, everyone else does, that same fear of getting passed away. So I think, the device is pretty simple. It doesn't matter really where you sit on that, scale from IC to executive. It's like, get started,
Right.
start experimenting,
It's like
tinker with
Excel
it.
and Word. Yeah, you need to start using it, right?
tinker with it, try to play with it, right? Like anytime new technology comes out, like it's the tinkerers, it's the people who are playing with it. That's why so much comes from kids, right? So our kids are where we look to for new technology trends, is because they're not afraid to just screw around. And so I think that the advice goes the same: is just get started, start tinkering with it, pick free up your team to do the same. Like I think like these people who are like barring their employees from being able to access ChatGPT. I mean, I understand sort of data security issues. So, but like on the other hand, like what are you doing? These people need to use this stuff for their work and learn how to use it for their work, right? You should be encouraging that, so get it on
Yeah.
premise instance stood up as quickly as possible, so your teammates aren't deprived of the next big tech. And then free up some special projects, where you're going to take a stab at it, and you're not going to measure it by the usual KPIs, right? You're not on the same. It's not, your goal is not process efficiency, right? That you might have in some of your other initiatives, right? Where you're like squeezing out some optimization. Your goal is to learn and to look for new ways of doing things. So I'm particularly excited in Gen AI applications where either end-to-end digital, and you can kind of like completely either cut humans out of the loop or like highly augmented them. So I'll give you some examples. So I like, for generative AI on imagery, I actually think like synthetic models is a really interesting thing. Like I remember when the pandemic hit, and they couldn't do photo shoots for e-commerce companies, right? So I don't know if you remember, but like during the pandemic, if you went actually like shopping for clothes online, there were no pictures of humans wearing clothes. There was only kind of pictures of clothing just kind of like floating in space or up against the wall, and that was because of social distancing. You actually couldn't put humans in a room and take photos. And so I think you look at this now post Midjourney, and you'd say, well, we don't even need to take photo shoots or with humans. We can just put
amazing.
We could just draw models in, right? So that's a whole piece of the process that used to have to get a bunch of people, get them in one place, take a bunch of pictures, have photographers. Now you can just do it with generative AI. Like really interesting opportunity to save money. I think product placement is like, and is another interesting. Saw this company called Flare AI, and they do product placement for e-commerce companies. So let's say you're like a marketplace and you have 10,000 SKUs. Now you can and you want to make images for all of them. Well, that used to be hard, but now you can actually take the stock image and put it in a nice background and have nice imagery, which anyone who does e-commerce knows that's really going to increase conversion. Another example is, let's say you have 10,000 SKUs and you need to write product descriptions. So I just came across this company called WordChef the other day that builds an e-commerce pipeline to take thousands of SKUs. Let's say you run a marketplace and write factual product descriptions for them. And so this technology is they're all these companies, most of them are using kind of OpenAI in the background, but they're building kind of value by tying into deep workflows. And so that's how I'd be thinking about it. It's like, okay, how can I start to embed this technology kind of into my workflows of my company? Pick a couple places where it seems like there's a really interesting use case to leverage computers that can, hear and see and read and write and see. Okay, maybe we can. And if you can't cut it out completely, there's a ton of examples of like where it's just like really making folks much more efficient. So a good example of that is in CX or customer service and contact centers. It turns out that everyone's like, oh, it's going to eliminate jobs, and I do think it is going to eliminate jobs. It's going to displace jobs. It's going to get rid of some jobs, create others. But what they've seen is that the generative AI chatbots can make inexperienced contact center people much more efficient, much more quickly. So they get up to speed much more quickly. And that's in part because, they have better access to information. They can query the internal chatbot, get better answers, and then, relay them to the customers. So, all examples of how you can sprinkle this technology into your business to make it more efficient.
Sounds super impressive, and I like the way that you are saying it's just keep using it, exploring it, instead of trying to hire a super professional person to start using it like it is kind of rocket science. That's what I wanted to say. Anyway, I know that you have another, and before we go to the last segment of the show, time flies. It's incredible when we are having fun. You have a nice report about how people use time, whether they are in the office or working remotely or working in hybrid modes. I'd like you to quickly talk about it because I think it's also interesting for the audience to get the lessons learned in that research that you did.
Oh, for sure. Well, at Kumospace, we obviously are paying, we have thousands of teams and hybrid and in person and distributed teams kind of working using Kumospace. And so we get to see a lot of the trends around how different companies working. Okay, this company's growing and is successful. Like, how are they organizing and managing their team? These other companies are not. But we also read a bunch of external research, and one of my favorite is this. It's called WFH, Work from Home research. It's a bunch of professors that write a monthly article, and it's always interesting. But the last one I saw was it was still looking at working time split on a typical weekday, and they looked at fully in person, fully remote, and hybrid teams, and then they looked at how much time you spent doing individual IC work, how much time you spent in small kind of 2 to 4 person meetings, and how much time you spent in large kind of conferences, 5+ meetings. And the really interesting thing was everyone's trying to get everyone back to hybrid. Hybrid is the future. This is going to be much more effective. And it turns out that if you're fully in person or fully remote, you spend over 75% of your time doing IC work, right? You're just kind of sitting there doing your work, and then the remaining 25% is split between small and large meetings. But if you're hybrid, you're spending less than 50% of your time actually doing IC work, because you're just having way more small and large meetings. And so I just think it's a funny observation. Everyone's trying to get people into the office to do more work. They end up spending a much more time socializing. So, take what you may from that. I guess my main thing is a lot of these things are counterintuitive. I do think there's a place for face-to-face. Obviously, it's huge, but I personally believe that, anything that can be done over the internet will be done, whether it's selling books, selling cars, or doing office work. And 90% of our office work can be done from home, and therefore should be, so that you can free people up to kind of live their best lives, spend less of their life in the car, spend more of their times with their kids. And that's our vision anyway at Kumospace.
Absolutely. So let's go to the last segment of the show, Brett, where we kind of do here a ping pong of quick questions and answers. So if you'd have the chance to have a coffee with yourself at the beginning of your, let's say, first startup, Sonar, in 2010, what advice would you offer to your younger Brett?
Well, I would tell myself, I think one of my biggest mistakes was waiting for the data back to see if I was good at anything, right? I started from the assumption that I didn't know anything. I would wait and see, from the external world, oh, did I do a pretty good job of this? And I think in retrospect, that's a total waste, because you wait years, particularly in something like venture capital, it takes years to get any data back about whether you're any good. And I think you just got to have to believe in yourself from the get-go, before you actually have the external validation or the data, because otherwise you're going to waste years of your life waiting for the world to tell you, that you're worth something.
So what are you the most proud of on your journey so far?
David Brooks, love him or hate him. I do believe in the kind of live for your eulogy, not your resume. And so I think I'm most proud of, I hope that people who I've interacted with say, this guy was a good guy to work with. He was ethical. He was supportive, and he improved the lives of the people he touched.
Worst advice ever received?
Well, we touched on some of it earlier. I think that saying it's all execution has nothing to do with the idea is pretty bad advice. So I guess I'll stick with that.
Sounds a great one. And now the resources, your favorite book,
Well,
business or non-business, as you wish.
I pretty much exclusively read fiction. So
Sounds
at
great.
this exact moment, I'm going to go with Henry Miller, Tropic of Cancer. It's just a uh, wild story, there in the 20s in Paris with the rest of them, but he was kind of the bad boy of that group. And but if I had to pick a nonfiction one, I think endurance is a must have for any startup founder. It's my in case of emergency, break glass and read book. It's about Shackleton's failed trip across the South Pole. And if you need something to get you through a tough time, that's a good one.
Amazing. Favorite movie or series, as you wish?
I don't watch movies.
Do you
But
watch?
I did not.
Do you watch
I
series?
don't. I don't.
Netflix,
I
HBO,
haven't had
Amazon.
a television since high school. I OD'd in
Sounds
high school,
great.
so I'm kind of useless there.
Okay, blank there. Favorite podcasts, excluding this one.
I exclude that. You're taking away from me. I pretty much I listen to books again. I kind of listen to books on tape, Audible, and so I would say that. And if I had to pick a podcast, I basically do The Economist when I'm running.
Sounds great. Awesome. Brett, thanks so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure to have you here, and you are always welcome to come back to keep sharing your journey. All the best for the future.
Mike, thank you for having me, and looking forward to hearing it. Take care, sir.
Thank you so much. And to our community, thanks for being there. We keep bringing you the best of the best to make your life a little bit easier as you scale up your company. See you soon and keep scaling.